Welcome back to Detective Podcast. Tonight's story creeps out of the shadows, but before we step inside, tell us, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city and country in the comments and become part of our growing circle of curious minds. Now, settle in, the investigation begins. Chapter 1. In the high hills of the West Country, where the wind carries the scent of wet stone and distant sea, the Abbey of St. Cuthbert stands like a quiet sentinel against the centuries. Its grey walls, patched with lichen and patched again by patient hands, enclose green cloisters where the only sounds are the soft tread of sandalled feet and the occasional flutter of a blackbird among the yews. Here the Benedictines live by the ancient rule, ora et labora, prayer and work. Keeping the hours with a regularity that makes the world outside seem feverish and haphazard. Once a year, however, the gates are opened wider. A handful of lay guests are admitted for a week of retreat, men and women who come, some with aching hearts, others with restless minds, to taste something of the monastic peace. They eat in the refectory with the brothers, attend the offices in the church, and walk the paths in silence. Most depart quieter than they arrived. A few leave changed forever. This particular autumn the company was unusually mixed. Sir Reginald Voss dominated it as he dominated every room he entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that carried, even when he spoke softly. He was a man who had made a fortune from steel and smoke. His factories stretched across 3 counties. His name appeared in newspapers as often for his pronouncements as for his profits. He had arrived in a sleek motor car that coughed black fumes upon the Abbey's gravel, declaring loudly that he came to observe these quaint survivals of superstition at first hand. He had even brought a portable typewriter, as though he intended to compose a pamphlet demolishing the monastic life between Vespers and Compline. The abbot, Dom Anselm, received him with the same gentle courtesy he would have offered a pilgrim barefoot and penitent. Dom Anselm was a scholar of the old school, pale, stooped, with eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. He had spent 40 years among manuscripts and prayer, yet retained a childlike wonder at the world. When Sir Reginald announced his intention to debate the existence of God over supper, the abbot merely inclined his head and said, "Truth is patient, Sir Reginald. It will wait for you." Father Lucien, the second guest of note, was a very different sort of churchman. Tall and angular, with a neatly trimmed beard and spectacles that flashed when he spoke, he had come from a London theological college to bridge the gulf between tradition and modernity. He spoke easily of reconciling Rome with the latest findings of German biblical criticism, and he carried in his briefcase a slim volume of his own essays entitled Faith Without Foundations. He and Sir Reginald had taken to one another at once, like 2 travellers discovering they were bound for the same destination. Brother Thomas, the young novice, was scarcely more than a boy. 18 summers had not yet hardened the flush that rose to his cheeks whenever anyone addressed him directly. He served at table with a shy earnestness, his eyes always lowered, yet he listened to every conversation as though his soul depended upon it. The other brothers smiled at him fondly. Sir Reginald called him the little monk, and asked whether he had ever considered the advantages of rationalism over rosaries. Mrs. Eleanor March, the sole woman among the guests, kept herself apart. She was a widow of comfortable means, dressed always in quiet blacks and greys, her face pale and composed. She had come seeking the silence she could not find in London drawing-rooms. She prayed long hours in the church, her lips moving without sound, and when she spoke it was in low tones that carried a faint tremor, as though every word cost her something. Mr. Gideon Crowe completed the little circle. He had once been Sir Reginald's private secretary, a position he had held for 12 years before an abrupt and unexplained dismissal. Now he wore the plain clothes of a pilgrim and carried himself with the careful dignity of a man who has been wounded but refuses to limp. He spoke little, but his eyes followed Sir Reginald with a steady, unblinking attention. And then, almost unnoticed, there arrived Father Brown. He came on foot, a small, round man in a black soutane that had seen better days, carrying a battered suitcase in one hand and an umbrella in the other. He had been making his way to a distant ordination in Cornwall when rain and a twisted ankle persuaded him to seek shelter. Dom Anselm, ever hospitable, offered him a cell for as many nights as he needed. Father Brown thanked him with a beaming smile, apologized profusely for the trouble, and settled into a corner of the guest refectory as though he had always been there. No one paid him much attention. He was, after all, only another priest, and a very ordinary-looking one at that. The second evening of the retreat began as the others had, with the tolling of the great bell calling the community to Compline. The brothers filed into the church in their black habits, the guests following more hesitantly. Candlelight flickered on the stone pillars and the carved rood screen. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, incense, and wax. Sir Reginald Voss, who had declared that he would attend the office for the sake of completeness, sat in the last row of choir stalls, arms folded, watching with the air of a man at a mildly diverting play. Beside him, Father Lucian whispered comments about plainchant and primitive psychology. As the last psalm faded and the brothers rose for the Marian antiphon, a sound broke the stillness, not the expected silence, but a scream, sharp and terrible, echoing from the western end of the church. The brothers turned as one. Guests started to their feet. In the ancient confessional, a tall wooden box carved with scenes of the Passion and the Saints, something dark had fallen against the grille. They hurried forward. The door was locked from the inside. The key could be seen glinting in the candlelight still in the lock. Through the narrow opening they saw Sir Reginald Voss slumped upon the penitent's kneeler, a dagger buried to the hilt in his breast. Blood had spread across his white shirt like ink on blotting paper. The dagger was Dom Anselm's own, an old liturgical knife kept in the sacristy for trimming wicks and cutting altar breads. No one could explain how it had come there. No window pierced the confessional walls. No secret door existed in that ancient woodwork. The high grille above, through which the confessor spoke to the penitent, was too narrow for any human form to pass. Yet the brothers, pale and shaken, swore to a man that they had heard a voice, deep, resonant, unearthly, murmur through the vaulted church only moments before the scream, "Thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting." The words of Daniel, spoken as though by the very stones. Father Brown, who had been kneeling near the back, rose quietly. He adjusted his spectacles, looked at the locked door, and murmured, almost to himself, "How very curious." Chapter 2. Dawn crept over the Abbey like a reluctant visitor, pale light filtering through the high lancet windows of the church and touching the stone flags with tentative fingers. The bell for lauds had rung, but the brothers sang more softly than usual, their voices threaded with unease. The body of Sir Reginald Voss had been carried to the mortuary chapel during the night, covered with a white pall embroidered with crosses. Yet the confessional still stood in the nave, its door now ajar and guarded by a young lay brother who looked as though he would rather be anywhere else. The local constable arrived on a bicycle just after 7 o'clock, puffing and red-faced from the climb. Sergeant Mallory was a broad, practical man with a moustache like a broom and a notebook that had seen better days. He examined the scene with the air of one who has seen too many rural tragedies and too few miracles. He peered into the confessional, noted the key still in the lock, the dagger still protruding from the dead man's chest, and the narrow grille above. Then he straightened and announced, "Locked from inside, no forced entry, no footprints, no ladder marks. This is either suicide or the work of angels, and I don't believe in angels." Dom Anselm, who had been waiting nearby with folded hands, inclined his head. "We believe in both, Sergeant, but we shall leave judgment to God and the law." Father Lucian, already dressed in his neat black suit despite the hour, adjusted his spectacles with a precise gesture. "This is no divine intervention, Dom Anselm. Mechanism, surely." The man had a flair for the dramatic. He entered the box, locked it, spoke his own voice of judgment, perhaps using some trick of acoustics or a hidden device, and then stabbed himself to complete the performance, a final mockery of the sacrament he despised. Brother Thomas, standing a little behind the abbot, crossed himself swiftly. But the voice, it came from everywhere and nowhere, like thunder inside the church. And Sir Reginald, he was not a man to jest with death. He boasted of life, not of dying. Mrs. March, who had been praying at the Lady Altar, rose and approached the group. Her face was drawn, but her voice steady. "He mocked God openly yesterday at supper, called the Eucharist a primitive superstition and confession a crutch for weak minds. Perhaps the judgment came swift as the prophet foretold." Mr. Gideon Crow, who had been silent until now, gave a short, dry laugh. "Judgment?" Sir Reginald had many enemies living and breathing. Some wear habits, some wear suits. Revenge needs no ghost to carry it out. Sergeant Mallory looked from one to another, then scribbled something in his notebook. "Enemies, you say? Care to elaborate, Mr. Crow?" Crow met his gaze levelly. "I was his secretary for 12 years. He dismissed me without warning, without reference. I lost everything, position, home, reputation. I came here to find peace, not to settle scores, but I won't pretend I mourn him." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Motive noted. An opportunity?" "Anyone could have taken the dagger from the sacristy between Vespers and Compline," Dom Anselm said quietly. "The door is never locked during the day." Father Brown, who had been standing a little apart, sipping a mug of weak tea provided by the guest brother, spoke for the first time since the discovery. His voice was mild, almost apologetic. "A man may lock a door against the world, but never against his own conscience. One wonders what Sir Reginald came to confess, if anything." The remark hung in the air for a moment, then seemed to dissolve amid the more urgent speculations. Sergeant Mallory cleared his throat. "I'll need statements from everyone. And no one leaves the Abbey until the coroner arrives. Which won't be till tomorrow at the earliest. The roads are foul after last night's rain." The group dispersed slowly. The brothers returned to their work, gardening, copying manuscripts, tending the sick. Though their usual rhythm felt fractured, the guests drifted to the refectory or the cloister garth, seeking warmth or solitude. Here is the shadowed interior of the confessional, where the impossible deed occurred, its carved wood still bearing the faint stain of tragedy. And another view from within, where light filters through the grille, like reluctant mercy. Father Brown wandered into the cloisters, where the morning sun had begun to warm the flagstones. The arched walkways framed patches of green lawn, and a single yew tree stood sentinel at the centre. He paused beside it, umbrella hooked over his arm, and watched a robin hop along the grass. Brother Thomas, sent to fetch herbs from the garden, passed by and hesitated. "Father, do you think it truly was suicide? Or something else?" Father Brown smiled gently. "A novice once asked his abbot why the saints look so peaceful in the paintings. The abbot replied, 'Because they have stopped pretending to be innocent.' Sir Reginald pretended nothing. He boasted of his sins. and therein lies the danger." The young monk frowned, puzzled. Danger? When a man declares himself beyond judgment, he invites it in the most unexpected ways. Not always from heaven, mind you, sometimes from his own heart. Brother Thomas nodded slowly, though he looked no less troubled. He continued on his errand, leaving Father Brown to his thoughts. In the garth, Mrs. March sat on a stone bench, rosary in hand. Father Brown approached quietly and sat at the far end. "Madam," he said after a moment, "you carry a heavy burden." She started, then relaxed fractionally. "How did you know, Father?" "One knows," he answered simply, "when a soul has confessed everything but the truth." Her fingers tightened on the beads. "Sir Reginald! He knew something. About my husband, a business matter long ago. Blackmail, though he called it practical advice. I prayed for his conversion every night. I thought perhaps here, in this holy place." Father Brown nodded. "To forgive is divine. To pretend one has forgiven when hatred remains. That is very human." She looked at him sharply, then away. "I did not kill him." "I didn't suppose you had," he said mildly. "But guilt has many rooms, and some are locked from the inside." Meanwhile, in the refectory, Father Lucian and Mr. Crow sat at opposite ends of the long table. The theologian spoke in low, urgent tones. "This is no mystery, Crow, it's psychology. The man was driven by his own arrogance to stage a grand exit. The voice, ventriloquism or auto-suggestion. The dagger, self-inflicted. We shall see." Crow smiled thinly. "You speak as though certainty were a virtue, Father Lucian." "Better certainty than superstition," the other replied. Father Brown, passing the doorway with his tea mug refilled, paused just long enough to hear the exchange, then continued on without comment. "Here are the peaceful cloisters, where quiet conversations unfold beneath the arches." By midday, the Abbey had settled into an uneasy hush. The coroner was awaited, the police photographer had come and gone, statements had been taken. Yet the question lingered, heavier than the autumn mist that clung to the hills. How does a man die in a locked box by a dagger not his own, with a voice that seemed to speak from the stones themselves? Father Brown, sitting on a bench near the chapter house, opened his breviary. But his eyes did not follow the words. Instead, they rested on the distant tower, where the bell would soon call to sext. "How very curious," he murmured again, almost to himself. Chapter 3. The day advanced with the slow inevitability of monastic time. After terce, the brothers scattered to their labours, some to the scriptorium, where quills scratched upon vellum in the hush of centuries, others to the kitchen garden, where frost still clung to the cabbages, a few to the infirmary, where the scent of herbs mingled with the faint odour of sickness. Yet the murder, or the apparent suicide, cast a shadow that no amount of routine could quite dispel. The Abbey, usually a place where silence was companionable, now felt watchful, as though the stones themselves were listening. Sergeant Mallory had set up a makeshift office in the porter's lodge, a small stone chamber near the main gate. There he interviewed each guest and brother in turn, his pencil moving with the deliberation of a man who trusts facts more than impressions. The statements were predictable enough. Dom Anselm had been in the choir stalls throughout the office of Compline, his voice joining the others in the Nunc Dimittis. Father Lucian had sat beside him, though he admitted to a slight cough that caused him to lower his hood momentarily. Brother Thomas had been serving as thurifer, swinging the censer in slow arcs, his eyes fixed on the altar. The guests, less accustomed to the rhythm of the liturgy, offered vaguer recollections. Mrs. March had knelt near the Lady Chapel, praying for the dead. Mr. Crow had stood at the back, arms folded, observing rather than participating. Father Brown, when his turn came, answered simply, "I was near the font, Sergeant. I heard the voice clear as a bell and then the scream, but I saw nothing unusual." "Nothing unusual?" Mallory echoed, eyebrows rising. "A man dead in a locked box with his own key, and a voice quoting scripture like a judge, and you call that usual?" Father Brown smiled apologetically. "In a house of prayer, Sergeant, voices are not always what they seem. Sometimes the echo of conscience is louder than any shout." Mallory grunted and wrote something down. "You priests have a way with words. I prefer facts. And the fact is, someone got that dagger from the sacristy, someone spoke those words, and someone put it into Voss's heart." By noon, the sergeant had turned his attention to the physical evidence, or the lack of it. He examined the confessional once more, tapping the wood, peering up at the grill. "Too narrow," he muttered. "A child couldn't squeeze through." And the key was in the lock inside. No string, no wire, nothing to pull it from outside. If it's murder, it's a clever one. Here is a closer view of the shadowed confessional interior, where the grill looms like a silent witness, and another angle showing the carved panels and the narrow space where death came. Father Lucien, who had lingered nearby, offered his theory again with the patience of a lecturer addressing slow pupils. "As I said, Sergeant, it is self-inflicted. Sir Reginald was a showman in his way. He wished to die dramatically in the very place of absolution to prove that no absolution was needed. The voice? A trick of the acoustics. Perhaps he spoke into a folded paper or some small device to amplify it. The dagger, he took himself. Suicide, pure and theatrical." Mallory scratched his chin. "And the key? Locked it from inside before he struck. Simple." Brother Thomas, who had been polishing candlesticks nearby, shook his head. "But he was not a man to end himself. Yesterday he spoke of building a new factory, of living to 100. He laughed at death. Men laugh loudest when fear is nearest," Father Lucien replied. In the cloisters, the afternoon light slanted through the arches, gilding the worn stones. Father Brown walked slowly along the covered way, his hands behind his back, umbrella swinging gently. The garth beyond was empty, save for a few late roses clinging to the wall. Dom Anselm joined him presently, his habit whispering against the flags. "Father Brown," he said quietly, "you have seen many strange things, I think." "Only the ordinary strangeness of men's hearts, Domine," the little priest answered. "They are all much the same, once the masks are off." The abbot paused beneath an arch, looking out over the lawn. "Sir Reginald wore no mask. He was brutally honest in his unbelief. Yet I cannot believe he took his own life here, in this place." "Perhaps honesty itself can be a mask," Father Brown murmured. "A man who boasts of sin may be hiding something far deeper, shame, perhaps, or terror. Here are the peaceful cloisters where such quiet reflections unfold, arched and timeless." Later, in the scriptorium, Father Brown found Father Lucien bent over a manuscript, comparing it with a modern printed edition. The theologian looked up, a trifle sharply. "You disapprove of my views, Father?" "I disapprove of nothing," Father Brown said mildly. "I only wonder sometimes whether reason can be as proud as faith. Both can blind us in their way." Father Lucien smiled thinly. "Reason at least shows us the world as it is. Faith shows us what we wish to see." "Perhaps," Father Brown replied, "but the world as it is includes the human soul, and the soul has a way of surprising even the most rational mind." In the library, a long room lined with shelves of ancient volumes lit by high windows, Mr. Crow sat alone, turning the pages of a psalter without apparent interest. Father Brown entered quietly and took a seat nearby. "You knew Sir Reginald well," he observed. "Too well," Crow answered without looking up. He was a man who believed power was the only truth. He used people as he used machines, until they broke, or until he tired of them. "And you broke?" Crow closed the book. "I was discarded, like a faulty part. I came here to forgive him, or to forget. I'm not sure which." "Forgiveness is hard," Father Brown said gently, "especially when the wrong was great. But hatred is heavier to carry than forgiveness, even if the load seems lighter at first." Crow looked at him then, searchingly. "You speak as though you know." "I know my own heart," Father Brown said. "It is enough to teach me about others." Here is a glimpse of the Abbey library where old knowledge rests in candlelit silence. As Vespers approached, the Abbey seemed to draw in upon itself. The bell tolled, steady and solemn. The brothers processed into the church, black habits flowing like shadows. The guests followed, more subdued now. Father Brown knelt near the back, his eyes on the confessional. It stood empty now, the door open, the bloodstain cleaned away. Yet the space seemed charged, as though waiting for another word, another act. Mrs. March passed close by, her face pale. She paused and whispered, "Father, last night I thought I heard the voice again, soft like a sigh, saying my name." Father Brown looked up kindly. "Conscience has many voices, madam, some gentle, some terrible. The trick is to listen to the right one." She nodded, uncertain, and moved on to her place. As the psalms rose once more, Father Brown closed his eyes. In the rhythm of the chant, he heard not only prayer, but the faint echo of something else, a question perhaps, or a warning. The murder, if murder it was, had not ended with the death of Sir Reginald Voss. It had only begun to speak. Chapter 4. The afternoon sun, pale and wintry, slanted across the Abbey grounds like a half-hearted blessing. The brothers had returned to their ordinary tasks, though the air remained thick with unspoken questions. In the cloister garth a few yellow leaves drifted across the grass, caught in small eddies of wind. Sergeant Mallory, having completed his initial inquiries, had retreated to the porter's lodge to await the coroner's arrival. He had left behind a single instruction. No one was to touch the confessional until the doctor had examined it properly. Yet the confessional, now standing open and empty, exerted a strange pull. Visitors to the church paused before it, crossed themselves, and hurried on. Even the candles burning at the high altar seemed to flicker more uncertainly. Father Brown, who had spent the morning in quiet observation, now made his way to the sacristy. The room was small and orderly, vestments hung in neat rows, the chalice safe in its cupboard, the old liturgical knife, its twin still in police custody, lying upon a velvet cloth. He picked it up carefully, turned it in the light. The blade was thin, sharp, almost fragile, a ceremonial tool, not a weapon. Yet it had served as both. Dom Anselm entered behind him, silent-footed as always. "You are interested in the instrument, Father?" "Only in how it came to be used," Father Brown replied, setting the knife down again. "It is a humble thing, meant for cutting bread and trimming wicks. Now it has become something else entirely." The abbot sighed. Pride turns even the simplest objects into weapons. Sir Reginald's pride, perhaps, or someone else's. Father Brown nodded. Pride is the oldest of sins and the most subtle. It whispers that we are above consequence, above mercy. When a man believes that, he becomes dangerous, not only to others, but to himself. As they spoke, Brother Thomas appeared at the door, breathless. "Father Anselm, Sergeant Mallory has found something. In the cloister garth, a page from Sir Reginald's notebook." The three of them hurried out. The sergeant stood near the central yew tree, holding a crumpled sheet of paper between finger and thumb, as though it might bite. The handwriting was bold, impatient, unmistakably Sir Reginald's. The words, written in black ink, were few. "Tonight I end the farce. No more masks, no more lies." Mallory looked up, triumphant. "Suicide note, plain as day. Found half under a rosebush. Wind must have carried it here after he dropped it." Father Lucian, who had followed the commotion, adjusted his spectacles. "There you are. The man intended to make a spectacle of his unbelief. He wrote this, locked himself in, spoke the words of judgment to complete the illusion, then took his own life. A theatrical exit from a theatrical existence." Mrs. March, drawn by the gathering, crossed herself. "To die in such a place with such words, it is terrible. Yet perhaps he sought some final defiance." Mr. Crow, standing a little apart, read the note over the sergeant's shoulder. His expression remained unreadable. He was always fond of grand gestures. This fits. Father Brown took the paper gently when offered, studied it for a long moment, then handed it back. It is his hand, certainly, but one wonders about the timing. If he wrote this before entering the confessional, why was it found outside? And if after, how did it leave the locked box? Mallory frowned. Dropped it on his way in, perhaps. Or the wind caught it later? Perhaps, Father Brown murmured. Yet the wind is not usually so selective. The sergeant pocketed the note. "It's enough for me. Suicide with a touch of blasphemy. Coroner will confirm it tomorrow." But the discovery had shifted the atmosphere. Where there had been unease, now there was a kind of relief, among some at least. Suicide was explicable, even if distasteful. Murder in a locked room was nightmare. Suicide was tragedy. Here is the cloister garth where the crumpled note was found, the yew tree standing silent witness. Father Brown wandered away from the group, umbrella hooked over his arm, and found his way to the narrow stair that led up to the choir loft. The loft was rarely used except for great feasts. Today it was dim, dust motes drifting in the slanted light from high windows. He stood at the railing, looking down at the confessional far below. The grille was visible, narrow, yes, but not impossibly so for a thin blade thrust downward. He measured the distance with his eye. A man standing here might just reach. A man with steady hands and no fear of falling. Brother Thomas, sent to fetch candles from the loft, found him there. "Father, is something wrong?" Father Brown turned, smiling. "Only the usual things, my son. Curiosity, mostly. Did you ever notice how the light falls through the grille at this hour?" The novice looked down. "It makes a pattern on the floor, like a cross, almost." "Almost," Father Brown agreed. "But not quite. Shadows can be very deceptive." They descended together. In the nave, Mrs. March was kneeling once more, her head bowed. Father Brown paused beside her. "You are troubled still, madam?" She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "The note, it confirms what I feared. He meant to die here, to prove something, and I prayed for him, Father, every night, yet I hated him too." Father Brown sat on the end of the pew. "Hatred is a heavy burden, but it is not the same as murder." "Isn't it?" she whispered. "In the heart, I mean. I wished him harm, more than once." "The heart is a large place," he said gently. "It can hold both love and hate, and still have room for grace. The danger is when we let one drive out the other." She bowed her head again. "I did not kill him, Father, but I cannot say I am innocent." Father Brown was silent for a moment. Then he said, "None of us can say that. But innocence is not the absence of sin. It is the willingness to be forgiven. Here is the high choir loft from which the nave and the confessional can be seen far below. As dusk gathered, the Abbey prepared for vespers. The brothers processed in, voices rising in the ancient chant. Father Lucian sat in his usual place, composed and watchful. Mr. Crow stood at the back, arms folded. Sergeant Mallory lingered near the door, notebook in hand. Father Brown knelt near the font, as he had the night before. His eyes moved slowly over the church, the rood screen, the altar, the empty confessional. Then upward to the choir loft. A faint sound reached him, not the voice of judgment this time, but the soft creak of wood, someone shifting weight. He looked up, but saw nothing. After the office, as the brothers filed out, Father Brown remained. He approached the confessional, stood before the open door, and spoke softly, as though to someone inside. "How very curious," he said again. "A note that escapes a locked room, a voice that comes from everywhere, and a dagger that finds its mark from above." He closed the door gently, turned the key, then removed it, and placed it in his pocket. No one saw. The Abbey settled into night. In the guest wing, lamps were extinguished one by one. Yet in the darkness, questions lingered like incense. Who had written the note? Who had spoken the words? And who had thrust the blade through the grill? Father Brown sat in his cell, breviary open but unread. Outside, the wind moved among the yews, whispering secrets no one yet understood. Pride, he thought, is a false trail. It leads men to believe they are masters of their fate. But fate has a way of leading back to truth. And truth, in this place of prayer, was beginning to stir. Chapter 5. Night fell upon the Abbey of St. Cuthbert with the heaviness of a drawn curtain. The wind had risen, rattling the high windows and sending small gusts through the cloisters like restless spirits seeking entry. In the guest wing, lamps burned low. In the cells of the brothers, only the faint glow of candlelight marked the places where men knelt in prayer or lay wakeful. The discovery of the note had quieted some fears, yet it had stirred others. Suicide, the sergeant believed. But the Abbey knew better than to accept easy answers. Father Brown had retired early, yet sleep eluded him. He sat at the small table in his cell, the breviary open before him, though his eyes rested not on the psalms but on the key he had taken from the confessional door. It lay there, plain iron, unremarkable. He turned it slowly between his fingers, listening to the Abbey settle around him. In the refectory, a small gathering had formed after Compline. Father Lucian, Mr. Crow, and Mrs. March sat at one end of the long table, cups of herbal tea cooling untouched. Sergeant Mallory had joined them, notebook open, seeking any final details before the coroner arrived at dawn. "The note settles it," the sergeant said, tapping the page where he had copied the words. "Clear intent, dramatic, as you said, Father Lucian. No need to complicate matters." Father Lucian nodded. Precisely. Sir Reginald was a man of extremes. He lived to dominate. He chose to die the same way, on his own terms, in the very seat of what he despised. Mrs. March stirred her tea absently. "Yet it troubles me. He spoke yesterday of building a new factory, of outliving us all. Why end it so suddenly?" "Despair can hide behind bravado," Mr. Crow said quietly. "I worked for him long enough to see it. He crushed others to hide his own doubts. Perhaps the Abbey exposed them. No audience here for his performances, only silence, and silence can be unbearable." Father Brown, who had slipped into the refectory unnoticed, took a seat at the far end. He poured himself tea and listened. Father Lucian leaned forward. "The human mind is a machine, Mrs. March. When the machine breaks, when pride meets reality, it can turn inward. Self-destruction is logical in such cases." Mrs. March looked up, her voice soft but steady. "Is it logical to die in a place of mercy? To choose the confessional as one's tomb?" "Symbolic," Father Lucian replied. "A final rejection," He mocked the sacrament by using it as a stage. Father Brown spoke then, his tone gentle. Symbols are powerful things. They can point to truth or away from it. One might ask what temptation led him into that box at all. He was no penitent, yet he entered willingly. The group turned to him, surprised by the interruption. Temptation? Sergeant Mallory echoed. You think someone lured him? Not necessarily, Father Brown said. Temptation need not come from outside. Sometimes it whispers from within. Pride whispers that we are above consequence. Despair whispers that we are beyond redemption. Either can draw a man into darkness. Mr. Crow's eyes narrowed. You speak as though you know his mind. I know the mind of man, Father Brown answered simply. It is much the same in all of us. We all have moments when we wish to prove something, to ourselves, to others, to God himself. A silence fell. Outside, the wind moaned. Mrs. March broke it. I must confess something. Her hands trembled on the table. Sir Reginald knew a secret about my late husband, a financial matter, dishonest, though not criminal. He used it to influence me. Years ago, I paid him to keep silent. I hated him for it. When he came here, I feared he would speak of it again. I prayed for strength. But part of me wished he would not leave this place alive. The sergeant's pencil paused. You admit to wishing him harm? I admit to sin, she said, eyes downcast. But I did not kill him. I was in the Lady Chapel during Compline. I heard the voice, but I saw nothing. Father Brown regarded her kindly. Confession is the beginning of mercy, madam. Thank you. Father Lucian frowned. This changes nothing. Emotional turmoil does not alter facts. The confessional was locked. The dagger was in his hand. The note was his. Yet the note escaped, Father Brown murmured, and the voice came from above. Mallory rubbed his moustache. We'd been over that. Wind, or he dropped it earlier. Father Brown rose quietly and left the room. The others watched him go, puzzled. Here is the dimly lit refectory where confessions are murmured and tea grows cold. He made his way to the church. It was empty now, save for the sanctuary lamp burning steadily before the tabernacle. He approached the confessional, stood inside the penitent's side, and looked up at the grille. The wood was dark, carved with vines and angels. He reached up. His fingers brushed the underside of the grille. A small ledge, barely an inch, ran along the top inside. He stepped out and climbed the narrow stair to the choir loft. There, in the shadows, he found what he sought, a single footprint in the thin dust of the floor near the railing. Fresh, not large. A man's shoe, perhaps, or a woman's with a sturdy sole. He did not disturb it. Instead, he descended again and sat in a pew, umbrella across his knees. Brother Thomas found him there half an hour later. The novice carried a lantern, his face pale in its glow. Father, I cannot sleep. The voice, I heard it again tonight. Faint, like a sigh, saying my name. Father Brown looked up. What did it say, my son? Thou art Wade, Brother Thomas whispered. Then my name. I thought I was imagining it, but it was real. Father Brown nodded slowly. Fear is a great tempter. It makes us doubt our own senses. Tell me, Brother Thomas, did you see anyone near the choir loft this evening? The novice hesitated. I saw Father Lucian leave the church early. He said he felt unwell, but he went toward the sacristy, not the loft. Perhaps, Father Brown said, or perhaps the path is longer than it seems. Here is the choir loft at night, shadows pooling where secrets hide. As midnight approached, the Abbey grew still, yet minds were far from rest. In his cell, Father Lucian paced, muttering to himself about reason and proof. In hers, Mrs. March prayed on her knees, tears falling upon her rosary. Mr. Crow sat by his window staring into the darkness, fingers drumming on the sill. Father Brown remained in the church. He spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear. Temptation comes in many forms. The temptation to control, to judge, to prove oneself right at any cost. And when pride meets opportunity, well, the mind can justify anything. He rose, adjusted his spectacles, and walked slowly toward the sacristy. There, in the cupboard, he found a long, thin rod used for adjusting the high candles. He measured it against the grill in his mind. Yes, possible. A sound behind him. Footsteps. He turned. Father Lucian stood in the doorway, face drawn. "You are up late, Father," the theologian said. "So are you," Father Brown replied mildly. "I could not sleep. The case, it troubles me more than I admitted." Father Brown nodded. "Truth has that effect. It troubles the mind until it is faced." Father Lucian's voice dropped. I spoke to Sir Reginald before Compline, alone. He mocked my work, said I was a traitor to the faith I pretended to defend. He threatened to write an article exposing my doubts, ruin me. Father Brown listened without judgment. "I did not kill him," Father Lucian continued, "but I wished he would be silent." "Wishing is not doing," Father Brown said gently. "But wishing can lead to doing, if the temptation is strong enough." The theologian looked away. "I am not proud of my thoughts." "None of us are," Father Brown answered. "That is why we have confession and mercy." They stood in silence. Outside, the wind howled once more. Father Brown placed a hand on the other's arm. "Go to bed, Father. Tomorrow brings light." As Father Lucian left, Father Brown remained. He looked up at the choir loft again, then at the confessional below. The temptations were clear now: pride in reason, hatred born of shame, fear of exposure. Each had drawn its owner toward darkness, but darkness, he knew, could not stand against the smallest light, if that light was allowed to shine. He closed the sacristy door softly and returned to his cell. The key from the confessional rested in his pocket, a quiet reminder that some doors, once locked, could still be opened by truth. Chapter 6. The Abbey woke to a morning of thin mist that clung to the hills like a shroud. The bell for prime rang softly, almost apologetically, as though reluctant to disturb the fragile peace that had settled after the night's uneasy confessions. The brothers moved through their duties with the careful tread of men who fear to break something already cracked. In the church, the sanctuary lamp burned steady, a single point of light in the grey dawn. Father Brown had risen before the bell. He walked the cloisters in silence, umbrella tucked under his arm, hands clasped behind his back. The arches framed patches of mist-shrouded lawn, and the yew tree in the garth stood dark against the pale sky. He paused often, listening, not to the wind, but to the small sounds that men make when they think themselves alone. A sigh, a footstep, the soft click of beads. He had become, in these few days, something of a shadow among the living. No one remarked on his presence. He asked few questions and offered fewer opinions, yet he heard everything. The Abbey, so accustomed to silence, now spoke in whispers, and Father Brown was its most attentive ear. In the scriptorium, Father Lucian worked alone. The theologian's usual composure had frayed. His quill moved in short, angry strokes across the parchment. Father Brown entered quietly and took a stool at the far end of the long table. He opened a book of hours, but his eyes were on the other man. After a time, Father Lucian set down the quill. "You watch me, Father Brown?" "I watch everyone," came the mild reply. "It is a habit of priests." "You think me guilty?" "I think you troubled, which is not the same thing." Father Lucian rubbed his temples. I spoke the truth last night. I wished him silent. But I did not kill him. I could not. The very idea is grotesque. Grotesque things happen when pride meets fear, Father Brown said gently. You are a man of reason, Father Lucian. Reason is a fine servant, but a cruel master. It can justify anything, even the unjustifiable. The theologian looked up sharply. You speak as though I were on trial. We are all on trial every day before our own conscience, before God. The question is not whether we fall, but whether we rise again. Father Lucian stared at the manuscript before him. I have spent my life trying to make faith reasonable, to strip away the superstitions, and now this. A locked room, a voice from nowhere. It mocks everything I believe. Or perhaps, Father Brown murmured, it invites you to believe something more. He rose and left without another word. Father Lucian watched him go, troubled. In the kitchen garden, Mr. Crow was helping Brother Thomas gather late herbs. The former secretary's hands moved with mechanical precision, but his eyes were distant. Father Brown approached along the path, pausing to admire a row of frost-kissed rosemary. You have a steady hand, Mr. Crow, he observed. Years of practice, Crow replied without looking up. One learns to be steady when one's livelihood depends on it. And when it is taken away? Crow's fingers stilled. Then one learns to be steady anyway, or one breaks. Father Brown nodded. Sir Reginald took much from you. Everything, Crow said quietly. Position, savings, good name. I was loyal, I was useful, then I was not. He discarded me like an old ledger. Yet you came here. To forgive him, or to prove to myself that I could. I am not sure which succeeded. Father Brown bent to touch a sprig of thyme. Forgiveness is hard. It requires us to give up our right to justice. That is a heavy price. Crow straightened, wiping his hands on his coat. I did not kill him, Father. I wanted to once, but not here, not like this. I believe you, Father Brown said simply. Crow looked at him then, searchingly. Why? Because you are honest about your hatred. The man who hides it is more dangerous. Here is the kitchen garden in winter light, where quiet truths are spoken among the herbs. Mrs. March was in the church, kneeling before the Lady Altar. Her rosary moved steadily through her fingers, but her lips were still. Father Brown entered and sat in the pew behind her. He waited. After a time she spoke without turning. You see too much, Father. I see what is there, he answered, and sometimes what is not. She turned then. Her face was pale but calm. I told you of the blackmail. I told the sergeant. It is out now. The shame is public, yet I feel lighter. Truth has that effect, Father Brown said. It is painful, but it frees. I still hated him, she confessed, even as I prayed for him. Is that unforgivable? No sin is unforgivable, he replied. Only the refusal to seek forgiveness. She bowed her head again. Then I seek it, for the hatred, for the relief I felt when I heard the scream. Father Brown was silent for a moment. Then he said, a parable. A man carried a stone in his pocket for years because it was proof of a wrong done him. One day he met the one who wronged him, and the stone felt heavier than ever. He could have thrown it. He could have struck with it. Instead, he laid it down. The man who wronged him walked on, unaware. But the one who laid down the stone walked lighter. Mrs. March smiled faintly. I am trying to lay it down. You are doing well, he said. Brother Thomas found Father Brown later in the cloister garth. The novice looked troubled. Father, I keep hearing things, whispers, my name, the same words. Am I going mad? Father Brown looked up at the sky. Madness is when we stop listening to reason. You are listening to something deeper. What is it? Perhaps conscience, Father Brown said. Perhaps fear. Perhaps grace. The soul speaks in many voices. The task is to learn which one is true. The young monk swallowed. I saw something last night. A shadow moving in the choir loft. I thought it was Father Lucian, but it was too quick. Father Brown nodded. Shadows move quickly when they are afraid of being seen. Here are the cloisters at dusk, where shadows and light play their own quiet mysteries. As the day waned, Father Brown became still more the observer. He sat in corners, walked corridors, listened at doors. He heard Father Lucian pacing in his cell. He heard Mr. Crow turning pages in the library without reading them. He heard Mrs. March weeping softly in the chapel. And he heard the Abbey itself, the creak of old wood, the sigh of wind through high windows, the distant toll of the bell calling to vespers. At last he returned to the church. The light was fading. He stood before the confessional, now sealed again by the police, and spoke aloud, though softly. You were weighed, he said to the empty box, and found wanting, but not by God, by man, by pride, by fear, by the need to be right. He turned and looked up at the choir loft. The railing was empty, yet he felt eyes upon him. Sergeant Mallory appeared in the doorway. Father Brown, a word? The little priest smiled. Always, Sergeant. The coroner arrives at dawn. He'll want the box undisturbed, but I've been thinking. That footprint in the loft, thin, fresh. Someone was up there. Yes, Father Brown agreed. Mallory hesitated. You know who, don't you? I know the heart, Father Brown said. The rest follows. The sergeant nodded slowly. Tomorrow, then? Tomorrow, Father Brown echoed. As Mallory left, Father Brown remained. He sat in the last pew, umbrella across his knees, and waited. The quiet listener had heard enough. Now the truth waited only for the right moment to speak. Chapter 7. The Abbey. Chapter House was a low, vaulted room of ancient stone, lit by tall candles that threw long shadows across the oak table. The brothers rarely used it for anything but solemn deliberations. Tonight it had been pressed into service as a place of reckoning. The coroner had come and gone at first light, pronouncing the death a matter for the police. Sergeant Mallory had returned with 2 constables, their boots loud on the flagstones. The guests and the community gathered under the abbot's quiet authority, faces pale in the candlelight. Father Brown sat near the back, small and unremarkable, his umbrella propped against the wall like a sleeping sentinel. He had said little all day, content to listen as the final threads drew together. Dom Anselm opened the proceedings with a prayer for the dead man's soul, then yielded the floor to Sergeant Mallory. The sergeant cleared his throat, notebook open. We have the facts, he began. Sir Reginald Voss found dead in a locked confessional, key inside, dagger from the sacristy, a note suggesting suicide, a voice heard by all, footprint in the choir loft, no clear way in or out, at first glance impossible. He paused, looking around the room. But impossibilities have explanations. The confessional has no secret passage, no hidden compartment. Yet the grille above, narrow as it is, allows a thin blade to pass downward. A man standing in the choir loft could thrust it through. The question is, how did he get there unseen, and how did he lock the door from inside after? Father Lucian sat, rigid, hands clasped on the table. Mr. Crow watched with quiet attention. Mrs. March's rosary beads clicked softly. Mallory continued. The voice was the key. It came just before the scream, not from the confessional itself, but from above. Someone spoke through the grille, then acted. But who could move so freely in the church during Compline without being noticed? Dom Anselm spoke gently. The brothers were in choir. The guests scattered about the nave. Only one left early. All eyes turned to Father Lucian. The theologian rose slowly. "I admit I left the choir. I felt unwell. I went to the sacristy for water. I did not go to the loft." Sergeant Mallory opened his notebook. "Yet Brother Thomas saw a shadow moving there shortly after, and the footprint matches the size of your shoe, Father. Thin sole, narrow tread." Father Lucian's face paled. "Coincidence." Father Brown rose then, quietly, almost apologetically, and stepped forward. The room fell silent. "The footprint is one thing," he said mildly. "The dagger is another. The voice is a third, but the heart is the true clue." He turned to Father Lucian. "You are a man of reason, sir. You have spent your life proving that faith can be made rational, stripped of mystery. Yet Sir Reginald Voss mocked even that. He saw your work as half-hearted, a compromise. He threatened to expose your doubts, to write that you were a traitor to both sides. You feared ruin, not merely of reputation, but of the certainty you had built your life upon." Father Lucian's voice was low. "I did fear it, but fear is not murder." "No," Father Brown agreed, "but fear, when joined to pride, becomes temptation. You saw a chance. Sir Reginald had boasted of entering the confessional to mock the sacrament. You followed. You waited in the choir loft, when he locked himself in, as you knew he would, to complete his performance. You spoke the words of judgment through the grille. Thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting. Then you dropped down, silent as a shadow among shadows, took the dagger from your sleeve, where you had hidden it after removing it from the sacristy, and thrust it through the grille into his heart." A gasp ran round the room. Mrs. March crossed herself. Brother Thomas's eyes widened. Father Brown continued, gentle but inexorable. "The blade was long enough, thin enough. You stepped back. You spoke once more, softly, to ensure the echo carried. Then, while the scream brought the others running, you used the key, Sir Reginald's own key, which he had left in the lock on his side. You reached through the grille with a thin rod, such as the one kept in the sacristy for the high candles, hooked the key, turned it, withdrew it, and pulled it up on a thread you had prepared. The key fell back inside, still in the lock. You retreated up the stair before anyone looked upward." Father Lucian laughed, short, bitter. "A pretty tale, Father, but impossible. I am no acrobat. And the rod, where is it?" "In the sacristy cupboard," Father Brown said simply. "I found it there last night. A few fibres of thread still clung to it. Black thread, like the hem of your cassock." The theologian sat down heavily. His hands shook. "But why?" Dom Anselm asked, voice full of sorrow. "Why this way?" "Because," Father Brown answered, "he wished to prove God's silence. You wished to prove it louder still. You spoke the words of divine judgment, but it was your judgment, your hand. Your pride could not bear his mockery. You sought to silence him forever, and in doing so, you proved the very thing you denied, that the soul cries out for justice, and that justice, when denied mercy, becomes vengeance." Father Lucian looked up. Tears stood in his eyes. I did not think. I only wanted him to stop, to be quiet, to let me keep my work, my certainty." Father Brown's voice was very gentle. "Certainty without humility is the greatest temptation of all. You played God, sir, and God does not share his throne." Sergeant Mallory stepped forward. "Father Lucian, I must ask you to come with us." The theologian rose again. He looked at the abbot. "Forgive me, Domine." Dom Anselm bowed his head. "We pray for you, my son." As the constables led him away, Father Brown remained standing. The chapter house was still. Mr. Crow spoke first. "I thought, perhaps it was me. I hated him enough." Father Brown smiled faintly. "Hatred confessed is hatred half defeated, Mr. Crow. You laid down your stone." Mrs. March whispered, "And I mine." Brother Thomas, tears on his cheeks, said, "He was a good man once, wasn't he?" Men are never wholly good or evil, Father Brown answered, only fallen and redeemable. Dom Anselm placed a hand on the little priest's shoulder. You have brought light, Father Brown, thank you. Father Brown shook his head. Light was always here. I merely opened a shutter. The candles burned lower. Outside, the mist began to lift, and the first stars appeared above the hills. The truth had spoken. Now the healing could begin. Chapter 8. The mist had lifted by morning, leaving the hills sharp and clear against a pale winter sky. The Abbey of St. Cuthbert stood as it had for centuries, quiet, enduring, a place where time moved slowly and grace moved more slowly still. The brothers returned to their offices, their voices rising once more in steady chant, as though the night's revelations had been but a brief interruption in the eternal rhythm of prayer. Yet the air felt lighter, as though a weight had been carried away on the wind. Father Lucian had been taken down the valley road in the sergeant's custody, handcuffed but unresisting. He had asked only one favour, that the community remember him in their prayers. Dom Anselm had promised it solemnly, and the abbot kept his word. Already the brothers had begun a novena for the prisoner's soul, a gentle chain of intercession that would stretch across weeks and perhaps years. In the chapter house where the truth had been spoken the night before, Dom Anselm gathered the remaining guests and a few of the older brothers. No candles were lit, daylight sufficed. The abbot's face was lined with sorrow, yet calm. We have seen sin, he said quietly. We have seen pride that sought to wear the mask of justice. We have seen how the human heart, when turned in upon itself, can become a locked room more terrible than any confessional. But we have also seen mercy. It was mercy that brought Father Brown here, mercy that listened, mercy that spoke. Let us not forget that mercy is greater than the sin it forgives. Mrs. March sat with her hands folded in her lap. The rosary beads no longer trembled. I carried hatred for so long, she said. It was like a stone in my heart. Last night, when the truth came out, I felt it fall away. Not because the wrong was undone, but because I was no longer alone in bearing it. Mr. Crow, who had been silent, spoke next. I came here thinking I would never forgive him. I thought forgiveness was weakness. Now I see it is strength, the strength to let go. I will pray for Father Lucian and for Sir Reginald. Brother Thomas, standing near the door, wiped his eyes. I was afraid, he confessed, afraid of the voice, afraid of the shadows. But Father Brown said the soul speaks in many voices. I think one of them was grace, calling me to trust. Dom Anselm looked around the small circle. Then let us trust, let us pray. And let us remember that the silent bell of conscience tolls for us all, but it tolls not to condemn, but to call us home. Father Brown had said little during the gathering. He sat in his accustomed corner, round-faced, peaceful, spectacles catching the light. When the others had spoken, he rose quietly. The voice we heard, he began, was not God's. It was man's. Yet God permitted it, as he permits all things that lead the proud to their knees. Father Lucian sought to prove God's silence by speaking judgment in his name. Sir Reginald sought to prove God's absence by dying in mockery of his mercy. Both were weighed, and both were found wanting, not in the balances of justice, but in the scales of pride. He paused, looking at the empty place where the confessional's shadow still seemed to linger in memory. The human soul is frail, he continued. It builds walls of certainty, of hatred, of fear. It locks itself in, thinking safety lies in solitude. Yet the door is never truly locked from the inside. Grace waits outside, patient, gentle, knocking. Sometimes it knocks with a scream in the night. sometimes with a whisper in the dark, sometimes with the quiet presence of a stranger who listens. He smiled faintly. I came here by accident, or so I thought, but accidents are often God's appointments. I listened, I heard the heart behind the words, and the heart, once heard, tells its own story. Mrs. March rose and approached him. You gave me back my peace, Father. Thank you. Father Brown shook his head. Peace comes from above. I merely pointed to the door. Mr. Crow extended his hand. I thought priests were fools. Now I think the foolish are those who refuse to listen. Father Brown took the hand with a gentle grip. Listening is the hardest work of all. Brother Thomas came last. He knelt impulsively, as though before a confessor. Will you hear my confession, Father? Father Brown placed a hand on the young monk's head. Later, my son. First, let us give thanks for the truth spoken, for the mercy received, for the silence that follows, and in that silence, the voice of God. The gathering dispersed slowly. The brothers returned to chapel for terce. The guests prepared to depart. The roads were clear now, the coroner's work done, the mystery resolved. Father Brown walked alone to the church one last time. The confessional stood empty, its door open, the grille catching the morning light in soft patterns. He stepped inside the penitent's side and knelt. No words came at first. Then, softly, he spoke. Lord, forgive us our locked doors. Forgive us our pride that thinks it can play at being you. Forgive the voices we raise in judgment and the silences we keep in fear. And grant, in your mercy, that we may one day hear your voice, not in thunder, but in the still small whisper that says, "Come home." He rose, dusted his knees, and adjusted his spectacles. Outside, the Abbey bell tolled, slow, solemn, merciful. Not the bell of judgment, but the bell of invitation. Father Brown collected his battered suitcase and his umbrella. Dom Anselm met him at the gate. You will be remembered in our prayers, Father. And you in mine, Father Brown replied. The abbot smiled. The invisible confessor has been heard at last. Father Brown nodded. And in being heard, he is no longer invisible, only human. And that is enough for grace. He set off down the path, a small black figure against the green hills. The wind caught the hem of his soutane, and for a moment he looked almost like a leaf carried on the breath of God. Behind him, the Abbey returned to its silence. But it was no longer the silence of dread, it was the silence of peace. The peace that passes understanding, the peace that follows confession, the peace that waits for every soul willing to unlock its door. In the church, a single candle burned before the tabernacle. It had not been lit by human hand that morning, yet it burned steadily, a quiet flame against the vastness of stone. Mercy, it seemed, had many ways of speaking, and in the end it always spoke last.